Welcome to another edition of the Colony Veterans Project interview series. I'm your host, Chretien Voerg, and I'd like to welcome our very special guest into the studios here today, Mr. Ryan Smithson. Ryan is a native of East Greenbush, New York, and a U.S. Army veteran of the Iraq War, where he served for 12 months with the equipment platoon of the 463rd Engineering Battalion. His new book, Ghosts of War, The True Story of a 19-Year-Old GI, chronicles his reaction to the terrorist attacks of September 11th, his decision to join the Army at the age of 17, the training which molded him into a soldier, and the war which transformed him forever. Ryan, thank you for your service and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'd like to start out in the beginning as if you would just tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your book.
Well, like you said, I was in high school during 9/11, and that was basically my main reason for joining. I wanted to do something. I wanted to serve. I still wanted a life outside of the military. I still wanted to go to college. I still wanted to I had a girlfriend who I went to high school with, so I wanted to keep all these connections in the civilian world. So I talked to some recruiters, and I ended up joining the reserves. And that was it was in December of 2002, so the war hadn't officially started. There was some stuff going on in Afghanistan. Iraq was popping up here and there in the news, but there wasn't a war as we know it today going on. When I went to basic training, it really it showed me a lot about myself and about duty and freedom and all those things. And it became more than just these words that we throw around. It became something that it really meant something to me. And then I saw, by that time, Iraq it was full force, and by the time I graduated from my job training, Saddam Hussein was caught and his regime had fallen, and we were trying to build the country back up. I joined as an engineer, and like I said, I wanted to do my part. I didn't want to be infantry. I didn't want to just learn how to kill people. I wanted to do something maybe that I could have a marketable skill with after. And when I got out of my job training, it was about 5 or 6 months before I got the call that I was being deployed. Obviously, kind of sends your world into a tailspin. I had maybe 2 or 3 weeks of notice before I had to get shipped out. So for a 19-year-old, it was a lot. The most important thing to me at the time was marrying Heather, my girlfriend. She had been there for me in high school and through basic training, and she was she was my pillar, and still is today. But I left after marrying her, and our honeymoon was spent on the other side of the planet. So it was very hard. We did all sorts of things in Iraq. Culture shock doesn't begin to describe it. And when I came home, I really wasn't talking about it. I wasn't letting it out. I wasn't processing it, not only to other people, but just to myself. I needed to get through these things and face them, and I wasn't doing that. I enrolled in college. I got a job. I just wanted to move on with my life, but I didn't realize how much I had to deal with what I went through. It was over as far as time is concerned, so I thought, I'll just forget about it, but it doesn't really work like that. I started writing in college, my second semester in English class, and that really became my therapy, and that became my way of communicating, that became my way of processing. And lo and behold, another year or so of writing, I eventually had all these stories, and I put them into a manuscript, and they got sold to HarperCollins. So that's a long and short of it.
Ryan, you were in high school at the time of September 11th and the terrorist attacks of that day. And I think that everybody is going to remember where they were when that happened. But as being in high school and as being a teenager at the time, I think that perhaps you and your generation were more impressionable. That is an impressionable period of time in your life. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering how much September 11th impacted your decision to join the Army.
Very much. It was the sole reason. I don't think I would have joined the military if it hadn't happened. I wouldn't have had a reason to. Maybe for college money or something, but I didn't come from a poor family. I didn't need to join the military for anything like that. It was just about the only reason I joined. And like you said, at that age, I was 16 when it happened, 17 when I enlisted. You are very impressionable, and I think you're also kind of searching for who you are and what you mean to the world and what the world means to you. September 11th became my meaning in a lot of ways. I just felt this need to do something. I felt like these are my people. This is my generation's turn to stand up and do something.
And after you enlisted, but before you left for basic training, you had gone through some conflicts in questioning your decision to enlist, and you decided that a trip to the World Trade Center site would be a fitting way to reaffirm your decision. Mm-hmm. And you and your girlfriend at the time decide that you're going to take a weekend trip to New York and visit Ground Zero. I was wondering if you'd read a section of the book regarding your trip for us.
Heather and I walked up to the fence that closed off the gray-blue crater from the public. Stuck in the fence were wreaths and flowers and notes from children, framed photographs of people in uniform and loose photographs of people with their families, small photographs that once sat in a father's wallet. Stuck in the fence were U.S. flags and banners proclaiming we will never forget. There were final goodbyes from relatives who couldn't say it in person. Pictures of angels drawn by heartbroken children, angels with sad faces and gray-blue tears. Stuck in the fence was New York City. Stuck in the fence was the United States of America. There were white people and black people and Hispanic people and Asian people and Jewish people and Muslim people and Christian people and small people and fat people and baby people and human people. Stuck in the fence was me. I'd heard all about September 11th, but I didn't feel the weight of it until I saw the fence. I didn't know these people. They were not my friends or family. I had never met them. Their existence before that day meant nothing to me, but at that moment, their existence meant everything to me. I let go. My throat tickled, my nose ran, and I cried. I shed tears I didn't deserve to shed. I was not entitled to tears, but they came nonetheless. These tears for injustice, for impurity, for virtue, for love, for hate, for misunderstanding, for innocence, for guilt, for nothing and for everything. Heather looked at me and cried too. We stood like that for a long time, not saying a word, just crying. We didn't sob. It was respectful crying, like at a funeral. We held each other, and people walked around like ghosts. A mother walked up to the fence, tears in her eyes, and dropped a fresh set of flowers next to a picture of a young man. She said something to the photograph and buried her face in her hands. I felt trapped in rubble, and the pressure was overwhelming. Twin Towers didn't fall in Manhattan. They fell on me. There is a certain romanticism that comes with being young. Young men and women just released from high school are ready to take on the world. They want to save it. They try for a while, but then they often get to a certain age and they give up because the world is a big place. It's impossible to fix, they think. And that's the problem I saw. America had given up, and that's why the World Trade Center was allowed to fall. If I don't do something, who will? I thought. I stopped crying. A month later, I left for basic training.
You've said twice now, if I didn't do something, who will? And that's a very strong feeling. And with the impact of the events of September 11th, why do you think maybe more people don't think that way?
That's hard to say. I was one of maybe 3 people from my class that joined. So it's not like it was an immediate thing. My whole generation felt this need. It was a very personal feeling. I don't know why people don't feel that. Maybe they just don't care, or they're afraid, or they feel like they have other things they want to do in life. And that's fine. That's American freedom, We don't have to serve in the military. But I know for me, I don't know, it was a very compelling need to do something, to stand up and serve my country that had, been this home for me for my whole life, and a lot of it I didn't even appreciate or understand. I wanted to serve her.
In your book, you mention many times, especially being in an engineering equipment operating section, I think a lot of people don't understand that there's more to military service than just infantry, and that there are a number of other jobs that need to happen along the way. And you refer to yourself and your fellow soldiers in your unit quite often in your book as G.I. Joe schmoes, that you're the regular guy.
Right.
And it's interesting to me that even though you are the regular soldier, the story that happens the most often seems to be the least told. Most of the books we see are by generals and colonels and snipers and special forces. What prompted you to actually put pen to paper and push the book out after you realized that it was therapy for you to write the stories? What prompted you to take the next step and actually publish the book?
It was pretty early on. Again, it was therapeutic, and it's still therapeutic, going out and talking about it and sharing the story with people. But as far as writing it, I wrote that first chapter for an English class in college, and later on in the semester, my professor wanted me to read it in front of everyone. Everyone went around and read one of their essays that they wrote for class, and I was really apprehensive. I didn't want to do it, and eventually I decided, maybe I should read it. These students I was with were 18, 19 years old, a little younger than I was, and none of them knew I was even in the military. I thought, well, maybe if I'm going to share it with people, it should be them. These are my peers. These are the ones who have friends that are over there. These are the ones who are going to shape how this war actually pans out, because they're going to be the ones coming of age and going through school and making the decisions. So I read this story, and it was incredibly difficult to read in front of everyone. But I got through it, and at the end of it, one of the students raised his hand and he said, "I just want to say you gave me a whole different perspective on what's going on over there." And so right after I wrote that first chapter, a semester after, at the end of the semester, I realized how important it was to share it. I was still processing, I was still using it as therapy for that year or so that I was writing, but I did have pretty early on that goal of, maybe I can get enough stories to put this into a book and really share it with people, because it can change the way people feel about it. Not that not politically, people will still have their political viewpoints, but to understand that the troops on the ground are just men and women trying to do the right thing, and we really need the support of people to do it.
I think you hit on a point, too, in your book, that there are a number of misconceptions that people have about what's really happening on the ground in Iraq with the G.I. Joe schmoes, with the regular troops out there. Would you do us a favor and read a section of your book regarding how some of these misconceptions really play out?
Mm-hmm. It's December, and the bugs aren't too bad. I notice it's chillier than I thought Kuwait would be, low 40s at nighttime. So far, no car bombs, no scorpions, and no sweltering heat. With every new experience, I learn how false my pretenses about the Middle East have been. Dozens of children line the road. They raise their hands. Their hands are empty. The kids look at Munoz and me with dark round eyes and pull their hands to their mouths. Their sheep stand in huddled masses behind them, and the children motion their empty hands to their mouths over and over again. They are begging for food. Cold lightning drops down my spine. Tears leak into the corner of my eyes. This is Neil Munoz's first time in Iraq, and he waves to the kids. "Jesus," he says. "You see that? You don't know what sadness looks like until you've seen children begging for food." Munoz rummages behind his seat, finds an open box of MREs. He tosses a few out of his window, and the kids rush to pick them up. In the side mirrors, I can see the children devouring the salty cardboard meals. This is the moment of my epiphany. When adults say, Someday you'll understand this is what they're talking about. When your parents yelled at you for not finishing dinner, there were children starving in Africa. This is why the drill sergeants told me I was stupid to be a hero. This is why we invaded Iraq. On the side of the road, their faces are worn, their bodies are scrawny, their clothes are rags. To get around, they use their feet, dirty farmland feet that have grown up walking on rocks, thick-skinned feet that have never worn designer shoes. The children look as if they should be in elementary school, but their eyes show wisdom I never would have understood in elementary school. These kids have wisdom I'm only beginning to grasp now. They are dirty and sweaty from working in the fields all day. They don't work to make money. They don't get allowance. They don't have part-time jobs after school bussing tables so they can buy their first cars or new clothes or DVD player combos for their bedrooms. They work to live. They farm crops and livestock so their family can eat. How many kids in America can say their day-to-day efforts are a result of the struggle to survive? Conscious of the fact that the military sees them as more of a threat than their children, the parents stand farther away from the road. They wave or hold their thumbs up, but they don't beg. In Middle Eastern culture, giving is more valued than receiving. On their faces, I see them watching our convoy intently, curious as to whether or not we will throw food, because they are hungry too. They are not burning flags in large, chaotic riots like I expected. Like the evening news said, their thumbs are up.
I think that section really speaks to some of the misconceptions that maybe the general population that we have is not being in Iraq and being there on the ground might have. What do you think some of these misconceptions, how do you think they might be generated? And is there any other way that we can change those?
It's a lot of things. Again, the politics get in the way a lot. And I mean, for good reason. There's politics and, behind everything. But when you go there and you see it, it becomes much more than that. It becomes this very human. You see this very human side of everything, especially being, low guy in the totem pole. I wasn't making decisions or anything. I was just doing what I was told. So when you're on that level, you feel like you're at the level with these people who you're trying to help and who, quite frankly, you can't trust. You don't know what's going to happen or who's the bad guy. It's not that kind of war. I think it's easy to point the finger at the media. They, not even necessarily a liberal slant or anything like that, but they're a business. They're selling stories that will sell, that are going to sell news clips and newspapers. And, watch reality television once. You'll realize what sells. It's sex and violence. Kids starving for food and asking troops for water is not going to make the evening news. The little things that I and my fellow soldiers did to try to help those people get by just because we could and just because we felt sorry for them. That stuff is not, excuse me, that stuff is not going to be reported on. And I guess nature of the beast, I don't know. I don't really know how to change it. I hope people can read my book and get that other side of it. And again, it's not a political argument. It's not going to change the way you feel about why we went into Iraq, but I hope that people realize we're in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we have to, at the very least, fix what is broken.
You hit on a key point, too, with the military and the media and the interrelationship between those two and the stories that we get back home. And as a former Marine and a veteran of the first Gulf War, I thought that I had a perspective that I could filter through some of the media hype that comes across on the news and understand what was really going on the ground. And when I read your book, I realized I was wrong. I didn't have a clue of what was really going on the ground, even though I had been there just years earlier in the same region with the same people. I didn't really understand what was happening, and I think that media filter is partially to blame, and for whatever reason, whether it be because the good stories don't sell or not. I thought it was very interesting in your book, you actually write a section about the news story that was never told. And I was wondering if you'd read that for us as well.
Yeah, sure. There's an 8-hour delay between Iraq and the United States. Millions of content American families will be sitting down for dinner 8 hours from now. They'll be tired from work. Their boss doesn't give them the recognition they deserve. They'll be hungry for dinner and for the evening news. They'll be ready for the daily body count, the daily bush bashing, the story from Iraq. And that's all it will be to them, a story. A dramatic saga full of twists and turns and epic heroism. It'll be entertainment, the only thing they'll ever learn about the Iraq War. They won't see this piece of war footage. On a mission to restore a bridge for the military and to cultivate farmland for a local Iraqi family, a voiceover won't introduce. Specialist Jeremiah Ingold, on his first mission, standing next to a Humvee, dressed in desert camo, body armor, and a helmet, waiting for his turn on the dump truck. To his right, palm trees overlook an embankment that runs down to the Tigris River. Behind him, dump trucks pour dirt into piles, bulldozers even the piles out. Ingold watches for potential hazards. He's holding his M16, barrel down by its pistol grip, taking a drag off the cigarette between his fingers. And America won't see the changeover between cameras. To a young Iraqi boy, no more than 8, walking down a lonely desert road toward this GI and his cigarette. This young boy wears a dirt red shirt with holes in the collar and under the armpits. He is shoeless. He is carrying a clear plastic bottle. Its contents are speckled and brown, like water from a mud puddle. Actually, it's from the Tigris River. The boy smiles. He waves to Ingold. Ingold waves back. To the boy, he says, "I hope you're washing your feet with that." The boy doesn't understand. Ingold asks him, "Are you drinking that?" and motions to his mouth with his hand. The little boy nods. "Hell no," Ingold says to this 8-year-old without shoes. Ingold reaches into a cardboard box in a nearby Humvee. Content American families everywhere won't see the beaming gratitude on the boy's face when Ingold shows him what drinking water is supposed to look like, clear and sparkling. There won't be a voiceover with some cutesy little pun about a clear future for Iraq. But it doesn't matter either way, does it? Bombs still go off and people still die for no good reason. Good deeds mean nothing when they're cast in the shadows of bad ones, right? America will never sit down and feel a lick of guilt as they watch this boy and this soldier in their one true moment of glory. Because unlike this little boy who won't be on their televisions, they've never had tears in their eyes over a bottle of water. They'll never see the way our efforts are shunned. At first, we don't care. In a way, it makes us proud. It's humility. And selfless service is truly selfless if you're never recognized. All in due time, we tell ourselves. America will know. All in due time. This is what we say. This is what we actually believe. The truth always comes out in the end. But somehow, the truth doesn't come out. So there's nobility. Hanging on for the sake of sharing our story. Because we realize that the truth can only come through us. So we tell people. We yell it right in their ears. But these letters and emails, they never break out farther than with our family members. For the bad news is what people want to hear. Sure, it's still the truth, the half of the truth that sells newspapers. And this truth is what buries us in frustration. We become consumed with anger. No acceptance, no sympathy, just pure boiling anger. The way people don't understand, the way they can't understand. It's like a back alley full of hot metal. The only people who understand are stuck here with us, feeling the same outrage and same fear that we'll die without a chance to share our story. And there's nothing we can do. No words or emails or made-for-TV movies we can produce to show our side. No Iraq war memoir that can explain what it feels like to watch our efforts kicked out of the way for the juicy car bomb footage. The good things we do and did, and the way our country tries to take those away from us. Support the troops isn't the way people feel. It's a slogan. Just like the war on terror. Just like we will never forget. Anger is lonely. No one really wants to hear this story, and no one who hears this story will truly hear it. For the beauty of war is surrounded by the gruesome, and that damn 8-hour delay filtering everything.
There is so much good that you're doing, and I think in your position as a construction equipment operator, you got to see not only the bad, but the good. And I think that's a perspective that not everyone is allowed to see.
Yeah, even over there, yeah. I don't think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people really just get consumed with that hate, because you feel like you can't do anything, and you feel like everyone is your enemy because you don't know who is your enemy. And not that I didn't feel that stuff, certainly you do, and that's part of being in a war. But you have to be, especially after it's over, you have to be able to find the good in it, or you'll drive yourself crazy.
And you had said that as an equipment operator in Iraq, that sometimes you felt like your efforts were just a very minute part of the entire operation.
And they were.
But in the end, you felt good. You felt good about what you did, and you realized that it is part of the mission, that there can't just be infantry and there can't just be artillery, that there needs to be roads to get from point A to point B. And I think it's amazing about your interaction with the local population in Iraq and their acceptance of you, but your conflicting mistrust of whether or not you can trust the people you're dealing with. How do you reconcile that? You have someone come up to you and you don't know whether they're going to ask you for food, water, or harm you.
I never had anyone come up to us and harm us. So I can't speak for somebody that has given that trust and not, and been betrayed. We never ran across that situation, so I think it was easy for us. On the other side of it, you never knew, and a big difficulty for soldiers in this war is trying to distinguish who's good and who's bad, and trying to not get complacent, because you need to always be ready for the worst. Again, like I said in that one passage, usually the adults kept their distance, and if it did come up to us, it was for a reason. It's because they had to get through our convoy. It's because whatever they had to do, and they would approach us, most of them very submissive. Usually it was the kids who came up to us, and while we were trained to not even trust them, because the people that are doing the insurgents, if you will, they'll use them for attacks too, and you put that in the back of your mind. But when a kid's asking you for water and it's 130 degrees out, you don't really say no. You can't. I wouldn't feel right as a human, not at least reaching out, throwing them a water. Even if I tell them to keep their distance, giving them a water. But again, we never had any situations like that, and the kids. And they're like kids here, they see the military, oh wow, cool, Humvee and guns. So they would come right up to it, and there was a boundary. They never got in our vehicles. They would look and try to get in, and we would, we'd stop them. So there's a boundary line there, but I don't know. You have to have a heart. You have to be willing to take that chance, knowing that it's for the better of the people and of those particular individuals you're dealing with.
But nonetheless, you always had that in the back of your mind, and had to deal with that on a daily basis. And in one part of your book too, you talk about a fake IED that was placed on the road, and you couldn't determine it was fake until after your entire flawless operation to handle this suspected explosive happened. And after your half-hour or 45-minute ordeal with dealing with this IED, you find out it's a fake, and that someone is standing not far away documenting your every move and your reaction, and that has to be extremely frustrating.
Oh yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the feelings that you had after you realized that this was a fake and it was a setup?
Yeah, frustration is the perfect word, and it's as close as you can get to what you feel, but it's so much more than that. There's these, and they do it all the time. They just plant something and watch what you do, and watch you with binoculars and write it down, and as long as they're not posing an immediate threat, if they don't have a weapon in their hand and are pointing it at you, you can't do anything. And that, we argued for months and months and months, soldiers did, about why it's like that, and why can't we take these? We know what he's doing, and he's just going to kill another soldier. Once he figures out our MO, he's going to use it to take out other soldiers that come after us. And, why can't we do something about this? And it comes down to the fact that, obviously, the Geneva Conventions, you can't shoot someone that's not posing a threat to you. Maybe you can detain them. I don't really know. I'm not in the military police or cavalry or anything like that. But that wasn't our job. Our job was to go from point A to point B and do engineer work. So we weren't going to go run off and chase someone and try to detain them. But I don't know. It's still something that bothers me. There's holes in our system, and there's always going to be, and war is so foggy anyway that there's always going to be somebody who will figure out some way to get around what you're doing and try to kill you. I don't know how we dealt with it. I think we just kind of said, at least we didn't die. At the end of the day, if we all went back to camp and we're alive, it was a good day.
We've talked a little bit about the children that you came across in Iraq and their feelings towards the military and their feeling towards you and their thankfulness for having you there and for supplying them with water and even just conversation sometimes. You also describe in your book the thankfulness of the children in America for your service. And I was wondering if you'd read a section for us regarding a letter you found on your bunk one night from a box to any soldier from a number of students in the United States. Would you read that section for us?
Mm-hmm. At the top, in blue crayon, there is one word, soldier. Perhaps the most adorable part is the fact that after the word soldier, there is a comma. It's unnecessary, but the comma's there because this child knows that when you address a letter, you put a comma after the name. My name is Soldier, and this is the letter that was left in my bunk this evening. It's not the first time. We've already had a few of these packages. Every time one comes, the cards get dispersed throughout the barracks, one for every soldier, and the food and hygiene products are put on a shelf in the common room. I smile at the card and take off my body armor. I put down my weapon and unlace my boots. I take off my shirt and feel the cool air of the barracks dry the sweat on my back. I pick up the card and open it. It wasn't folded straight down the middle, so its edges don't quite line up. On the left side of the card, there's a big drawing of the American flag. A dozen blue stars in the upper left-hand corner are unsymmetrical, crooked, perfect. The kid tried to use a white crayon for the stripes, but hasn't yet learned that white crayon never works. Uneven, horizontal streaks of pale wax alternating with uneven horizontal red lines form the rest of the flag. There are 7 stripes. Underneath it is a big red U, a waxy white S, and a dark blue A. On the right side, a message sums up everything the kid would ever want to know about me. In lopsided, misspelled words. He writes, "How is Iraq? Is it hot there? I hope you're okay. I think you are brave. I have a dog. He pees on the floor and makes my dad mad. Do you have a dog? Are you a general or a captain?" The innocence behind this last question makes me chuckle. At the bottom, exactly how his teacher taught him, the kid writes, "Thank you, from Dylan." It's a touching card, and the corners of my eyes start to feel ticklish. But I don't cry. It's just a card. The gluey, pulpy smell of the construction paper reminds me of 2nd grade. There's a war going on outside, and I'd give anything to be in 2nd grade again. But I don't cry. I read the last line one more time, and I touch the raised, waxy letters. Thank you. I'm amazed at how easy it is for a kid to say it, yet it seems so hard for adults. I'm amazed at how much courage it takes to say it, and at the courageous young boy who said it. I reread the card, making sure I didn't miss anything. Then I touch it again, feeling the love and innocence of one little boy. I lie down on my bunk. The war will be there tomorrow. The only thing that matters tonight is this green piece of construction paper. We call it relief.
You think the boy who wrote that really comprehends the amount of support that little piece of paper can give to you?
No.
And I'm sure it was a project with his teacher, and I'm sure every kid in the class wrote one.
Mm-hmm.
you hope the teacher understands, and that by doing this, that someday the students will understand. Is that your hope as well, or are you just happy to have the card?
Yeah, I mean both. But one of the reasons I wrote the book is to show that we do appreciate the support. It's not always easy to say for us. So, when somebody says thank you, I'd go out. But when I got home, before I was talking about it or anything, I'd go out in uniform, going to my reserve drill or whatever, and people would come up and shake my hand and say thank you. And it was always hard to kind of take that, like, whatever. Like I said, G.I. Joe Schmo, I didn't do a whole lot. But, you take it, you do appreciate it, but it's hard to really show your appreciation for it. And I think it's important that people know, that the American people know that we do appreciate it, and it does help, even if we can't always say it.
So your book as a whole, there's a number of topics where you hit upon that just people don't understand, and there's no matter what you do to write a book or to be thankful for a piece of construction paper, you can't convey that to the person on the other side saying thank you to you. Mm-hmm. And I haven't come to grips with how to deal with that when someone comes up and says thank you, or when you get this piece of green paper folded cockeyed and with the wrong number of stripes, and it just says thank you on it, what it does to you on the inside. And that's the good part of not understanding. Yeah. And you also touch on the bad part of not understanding, and you're thankful that people don't have to go through that as well. But yet at the same point, it's difficult to speak to people who haven't been in that situation, because you know that no matter how much you try to explain, that they're never really going to understand. And I think you did a good job in your book trying to convey that as best you can. But I think it's a feeling that only people who've been there and been through it really know. Mm-hmm. Do you feel the same way, or?
Oh yeah, yeah. As much as I can put into words, and as lucky as I am to have the talent to be able to articulate these things we went through, no, people are never going to fully get it. You really have to live something in order to understand it, and that's true with a lot of things. But another aspect of why I wrote the book is because I do have this talent. I have this voice. And if I can give at least a little bit of voice to all these soldiers who will never be able to talk about it, will never be able to share that experience, I'm honored to be able to do that.
And you are right, you do have a great talent, and you use that talent in your book, not only in the stories you tell, but the way you tell them. And in a number of chapters, you use different writing formats to try to convey the story. And one chapter in particular you have is called The House That Ahmed Built. And you write this in almost a nursery rhyme type chapter as the experience of your first firefight. And I was very curious of what gave you the motivation or inspired you to write this chapter the way you did.
That was actually the first chapter I wrote, and it was like I said, it was a response to an essay in English class in college, and the assignment was to write about a time we saw something destroyed. And at this point, I'd been home for a year, and I really felt all these things that I needed to get out, I needed to put down somewhere. And writing has always kind of been my way of dealing. So I figured, this is when I should start writing. And I sat down, and I just went to write this essay, and I cranked out like 12 pages. It poured right out at the story of our first firefight. And I went back over it and re-edited it and reworked it, and it kept feeling like there was something missing. It wasn't quite right. It was the story, it's what happened, but it needed something more. And somehow I just got this idea to do a parody of the house that Jack built and kind of weave it into this story. And I think on the surface it's just kind of a clever little way to write a story, but the meaning of it is a lot deeper. You know, it's about the loss of innocence. It's about coming of age and losing that kind of nursery rhyme view of the world, and that whole, you know, the very American, you know, happy endings and all that, and it's sort of parroting that kind of view, and metaphorically, I'm kind of showing, yeah, there were bombs and people died, but really what's destroyed is the people involved. That's the best way I can really articulate it.
You also organize your book interestingly as well. You organize the book the same way that the Army trained you, in phases. Mm-hmm. As you say in the book, walk, crawl, walk, and run. Mm-hmm. What gave you the inspiration or the idea to organize the book in the same way as you were trained?
That was an interesting development. When I had all these stories, and you kind of touched upon before how the stories have their own feel, they have their own kind of structure. And that's because I wrote them all as their own independent stories. I didn't write this beginning, middle, end. I just started writing these stories that I felt like I needed to get out. And that professor I wrote that first essay for, actually, when I was out of her class, would sit down with me and go through each and every story I wrote. When I put them all together, they didn't flow right. You know, they worked for me and the people that knew me because they could follow it. They knew what was going on. But for somebody just walking in a bookstore and picking up this book, it wouldn't really have flown quite right. But nonetheless, I tried to sell it, and when I went out to all these literary agents, I got a whole bunch that turned me down, like 50 or so. And one of them sent me this very detailed letter back saying, we're not going to represent it, but this is why. And here's how you can improve. And they gave me a couple key points I could work on. One of them being it didn't have an overarching theme. So I sat down again with that professor, and we tried to figure out a theme we could do. And the theme we originally chose was duty, honor, and country. And at the beginning of the book, I was going to give the oath of enlistment you take when you join the armed forces. And then each section would have stories that related to a sense of duty, of honor, or of country. When that got sold to HarperCollins, that's the manuscript that actually got sold. When that went to HarperCollins, they again, I still had to work on some different things as far as style and flow. But they said, we don't really want to do the duty, honor, country thing. It's too fragmented. It doesn't quite flow right. If you could figure out another way to do it, that'd be great. And that's kind of what they hit me with. And I sat down to write it beginning, middle, end. And I added a lot at the beginning because there wasn't a whole lot about 9/11. There wasn't a whole lot about, there was a lot about basic training, but not so much about going to Fort Bragg for mobilization training and then going to Kuwait and then going into Iraq. It just kind of started in basic training and then went to Iraq. So the long and short of it, basically, as I went to do this, I had all these chapters about basic training, and then all this other stuff they wanted to put in before I actually reach Iraq. I said, you know, the kids are going to be on page 150 before they even get into Iraq. And my editor was like, oh man, well, what, you know, how can we do that? And I said, I think I have an idea. I think we can break it up into, take these same 3 sections, but give them different names and kind of rework them a little differently, and to reflect the phases you go through in basic training, the red, white, and blue phases. And that's really how it came to be. So it was a developmental thing. From the beginning, I didn't intend to do that, which is kind of interesting, you know. But it was a lot of work. It was a lot of revision. But in the end, it was really worth it because I think it really works.
It does flow very well. One of the other things you touch on in your book quite often is the humor that's involved in your situation in Iraq, and how important that is to keeping your sanity, and that if it wasn't for humor, you would actually be insane.
Right.
Could you maybe describe for us some of the more humorous aspects, or maybe a funny story or two that happened while you were there, to kind of ease your tensions and make you relax a little bit?
Yeah. It was kind of it was always, you know, the general, you know, male ego, you know, kind of busting each other's chops and stuff. I mean, that was all over the place all the time. There was a couple, when I write about it in the book, when it really first comes to fruit as this humor, and I kind of realize it, like, wow, this is more than just being funny. This is dealing with this situation we're in. We're spraying off these Humvees that came into our motor pool, and they're all covered. Two guys had died in them, and we had to clean them out and kind of strip them, and we were taking the armor to put on our own vehicles because the armor supply was pretty limited at the time. So we're stripping these down, and we pull the roof off of one, and there's this huge blood stain from the gunner who was standing up through the turret. And it really, you could just feel this, like, just kind of release from everyone, like, oh my God, I can't believe, like, we're looking at this, and we're the ones who have to clean this up. We're just engineers. We joined to, like, push dirt around, and we got to deal with this. It's a very serious issue, and we're spraying it off, and one guy had this pressure washer, and it bounced off of something and went into his mouth, which was just vile, and one of the other guys just started laughing. And I was, like, sickened. I was going to throw up at just the sight of this, and this guy's laughing over it. And for the next couple weeks, he kept calling him zombie. Wow, you ate brains, you ate brains. We kept checking him to see if he was, turning a little zombie-ish, I guess. And I kind of realized, that was his way of dealing with it. And the rest of us kind of really quickly followed suit, like, oh yeah, that is funny, because we didn't want to face what it really was, because when you get right down to it, you can't do anything about it. In that situation, it's in the past, but even as it's happening, you can't, you fight for your life in certain cases, but in the end, that if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. So the only thing we can do is laugh about it. And, I talk about that a lot in the book, and I think it's a big part of being in a combat zone, and I think it's something, again, one of those things that people don't really understand. And I hope I can kind of shed some light on why soldiers do that and why it's important.
I think so. I think on the surface it would look like you were making light of a serious situation, but in the end it's a matter of being able to deal with the situation you're in. And without using that, not so much as humor, it wasn't a funny situation, but it was either that or completely break down and lose it.
Right.
So you have to make the decision of, and it's not a conscious decision, it's almost subconscious.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That in order to survive, this is what I need to do.
Yeah, that's actually something, the humor as a whole, I probably realized that a little bit while I was there, but it was only through writing when I really started to analyze what these situations. I knew that they were funny, I knew they were weird, but when I really wrote about them, I realized, wow, that's why we did that, which again was part of that therapy, part of that processing.
You also had some generally funny situations as well, where it wasn't as a relief as much as it was just actually funny, and you do a good job too towards the end of the book in your post-processing after your unit is advised that you're going home, and you're sitting around in Kuwait, and you bring up a number of stories that were truly humorous. And I thought it was a good way for you to post-process and kind of close that chapter. Is that the way you envisioned that when you wrote that? This was almost a family sitting around a Thanksgiving table, trading stories and remembering the good times in order to cope with the bad?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. That story, the narrative follows from when we first leave Iraq to going through to Kuwait, and then back to Fort Bragg to when we actually leave one another. And it's interesting because for the whole year, we're kind of looking forward to that moment. Like, I want to get home, I want to get home, I don't want to be away anymore. And then as it's ending, you really start to realize how much those people mean to you. And not that you didn't know it, but you realize, wow, this is over. We did it. We lived through it. And let's not dwell on everything bad that happened. Let's kind of hold on to the good moments.
And being in a reserve unit, you're not kept with those same people again.
Right.
That was actually a reserve unit out of West Virginia. So when you left, you were most likely not going to see those people ever again in your military career.
Right.
Yet you have an overwhelming sadness in leaving your family, and that has to be a conflict for yourself as well, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Where the faces of the people that you're leaving directly anchor you to Iraq, yet at the same time you're going to miss them. How do you deal with those two absolutely conflicting emotions?
Again, you focus on the positive. You focus on, wow, I'm going to get home. I'm going to see my wife. I'm going to see my parents. For a year, you don't know if you're going to go home. So the euphoria of seeing them again, it really, in the moment, it replaces that sadness you have of leaving those people. And, you shake hands and you give hugs and you say, yeah, we'll keep in touch, we'll keep in and you do. We've actually had a couple reunions and we keep in touch by phone and email and everything else. But, you don't really realize how sad you are to not have them around until you're home, sitting around one day, thinking about this year you spent with these people, and that now it's over, and they're on the other side of the country. So I think as far as dealing with that, it really comes after you get home and see your family again, and everyone's kind of, when you first get home, everyone's, oh, hey, so good to see you, and I'm so glad you're home, and blah, 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 and then it kind of dies down. After a month or so, you stop seeing people that you left. You've met them all. They've all said what they wanted to say to you. And now you just feel this really deep isolation. That was the hardest part by far of coming home. And it stays with you. I mean, it's still something I feel sometimes. I just sit around and think about these people, and I wonder how they're doing, and I hope they're okay.
You discussed, too, in the end of your book, your transition to coming home, and how, in the end, it was difficult. And you didn't anticipate it being difficult. You thought it was going to be great, and it was all going to be roses. And in the end, there really was a problem with transitioning. And I remember at one point in your story, you're talking about in your apartment at night, and you have this overwhelming feeling that someone's going to come and kill you, and you end up in the kitchen with a knife, and you're scared you're going to do something terrible with the knife. And at that point, it's when you realize that PTSD is affecting you. Mm-hmm. How did you go about actually coming to the realization yourself, saying, yes, I'm suffering?
Those night terrors, they happened for a few months. Once a week, twice a week, they would just have, and I just wake up and be terrified, and I couldn't explain it, I couldn't rationalize it, I couldn't talk myself out of it. It just happened. They ended on their own, and I talk about the very kind of otherworldly experience that happened that ends them. But I was very ashamed of them. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell my parents. Again, at this point, I wasn't talking about anything. And when I wrote that story, it took me a while to even get to writing that story. I wrote a lot of stuff about Iraq and about basic training and stuff like that. And then I finally, one day I sat down and said, I need to write about this. Because one, I need to process it for myself and try to make sense of it. And two, as far as being a book, I need to share this with vets. Vets need to know that things can happen and you don't see them coming, and you kind of scoff at PTSD briefings when you come home from Iraq, like, yeah, whatever, I'll be all right. But it's real, and it's important that if you're suffering, you need to go out and get help.
Absolutely, and I think you also portray that you don't have to have been a special forces person or a POW to have suffered from PTSD, that it's traumatic, and the entire war experience is traumatic, regardless of whether you're an engineer or infantry, that there's situations that you're in that do affect you, and you do an excellent job of trying to convey that getting help is a good thing, mm-hmm. and also finding an outlet. And I'm very happy with the book in the outlet that you're trying to share your story with others. I think it's an excellent way to not only find therapy for yourself, but to help other people. Ryan, I do have to ask you though, where did you come up with the title for the book, and who are the Ghosts of War?
Ghosts of War came out as I was writing. I did just a short little chapter about kind of just summing up the whole experience, and that's what came out as I was writing. A lot of the metaphors and things that I write about just kind of happen as I write them, and that's a perfect example. The original title when I sold it was actually Silence and Silhouettes, which is the title of that chapter where I was having the night terrors. When it went to HarperCollins, I guess marketing, they wanted The Ghosts of War to be the title. And they're a giant publishing company, so I'm not going to argue with. Ultimately, it was up to me. They asked me if it was okay, but I think they made some good points in wanting to do that. The subtitle was Ghosts of War, Silence and Silhouettes, Ghosts of War. So it was in there. But the Ghosts of War themselves are kind of everything, the end-all, be-all of what a war does to a human being. And my story, I don't want to try to speak for everyone that goes through this, but it's everything you carry with you. It's everything you went through. It's all these things that you have to face if you're going to get over it. You're never going to let it go. It's always going to be a part of you. But I think they're very there's something very tangible about them. These experiences you have and these people you meet. There's this thing you feel like you have to. You feel like you can hold and you can use, but when you realize that you can't change it, it becomes this sort of ghost, this thing that you can't physically touch, that you really long to, but you can't. And part of the therapy and part of processing through it is realizing that they are ghosts, and they're always there behind you. They're always there with you, but there's important lessons you can take from them, good and bad. It's a pretty vague, elusive term, and I mean it to be that way. I want people to interpret it. I want them to kind of take their own meaning from it, and that's just my personal meaning for them.
Ryan, I have to ask you about my favorite chapter in the book, and it's called Bazooka Cat. And when I read the title of the chapter, I had no concept of what the rest of the story would be about. And I was wondering if you could read a section of that chapter for us.
Sure.
And hopefully everyone else can understand why I like it so much.
All right. Bazooka Cat. A group of kids surround us. Our convoy is stopped momentarily, and the dirt is flying through the air. Not a sandstorm, just the wind blowing dirt in the desert. As always, the sun is out, and I hold a semi-automatic rifle as I talk to the local kids. They are telling us about their lives, their innocent lives. Farm, one says, pointing to the vast desert. You live on a farm over there? I ask. Yes, he says. There, He makes a shoveling motion. Shovel? He shakes his head. He gets on his knees and pats the ground. You grow plants? Yes. What types of plants? He shapes his hands into a ball about the size of a basketball. Water? He says. Watermelon. Yes, he says, excited. Watermelon. Very good, yes? Yeah, I love watermelons. The boy, his brothers, and his friends are so excited to hear this. We, the American GIs, might as well be from a different planet. The Iraqi kids look up to us in a way I can't describe. They understand how lucky we are to be from America. They understand better than we do. Still, they try to give us anything they have. It's appreciation. It's their culture. You want watermelon? No, I laugh. No, thank you. I run, he says, pointing toward his farm. I run, get melon. No, thanks. Maybe tomorrow, I offer. Tomorrow, if we're here. I know we won't be. He nods his head with enthusiasm. I know he'll be standing here tomorrow holding a watermelon, probably a dozen watermelons. Our convoy isn't running this way tomorrow, but he'll be standing there waiting, holding watermelons for the Americans. Another boy rushes to the front of the group. He has no shoes, and he looks as if he's been learning the backstroke in a pile of dust. He wipes the sweat off his face with his dirty white robe and motions to his mouth. "Water?" he asks. I know he's been working in the fields all day. All of these kids have been. I remember being their age, 9 or 10. Work was a distant concept, something moms and dads did to pay for drum lessons, cable television, and summer camp. These children work because their families can't survive without it. They work because the top 5% of Iraq's population, those who have the money, land, and power, don't have a reason to care about the other 95%. I grabbed the kid a Gatorade from the cooler in our Humvee. It's dripping water, and just the feel of its cold plastic is a relief from the 120-degree sun. The boy holds up the orange sports drink proudly, like a trophy, his smile wider than his face. His friends look at him as though he's made the venture into manhood. They look at him like American boys look at the kid with the newest video game system. Before the Americans came to Iraq, Gatorade for these kids was unheard of, a dream, non-existent. Water that tastes like flavored sugar, juice that doesn't come from a fruit, and made from water not pulled from the Tigris River, it was unreal and unobtainable. This American schmo pulls it from his Humvee like pocket lint. I hand out a half dozen Gatorades and water to the kids, who are trying to sneak peeks inside the Humvee. One of them comes to me and holds out a small fuzzy object. It's white and appears homemade. He holds it up, showing it off. "Can I see?" I ask. He places it in my hand. It looks like a rabbit's foot, but slightly modified. The top of its hide is pulled into 2 pointy ears, and small beads are glued to the front for eyes. It even has pink stitching that makes a triangular nose. The baby's soft white fur extends from the bottom, creating a sort of fluffy dress. It reminds me of the tissue and string ghosts I used to make in elementary school around Halloween. In an ugly sort of way, like a baby pug, it's remarkably cute. I can't tell if the little craft is designed to be a cat or an owl. "Is it a cat?" I ask. "Bazuna," the boy replies. "Bazuna?" "Yes." "Does that mean cat?" "Bazuna." "Owl?" "Bazuna." Like, hoo-hoo, I mock an owl. "Meow, meow," he says and claws the air. "A cat," I conclude. "Bazuna," he corrects. "Bazuna." "Yes. In English, cat." "Cat," "Cat," he repeats. I smile at him. "Meow, meow," I say. "Cat." "Cat." You got it. In Arabic, "Bazuna," he says. "Bazuna." "Yes," he says, smiling. "You got it." He gives me the Bazuna cat in exchange for a Gatorade. The other kids admire their friend for learning some English from the American. These kids are the future of Iraq. They're the ones who will decide whether or not this war means anything. Not the commander, not American politicians or the press. It's the children who will always remember the Americans who stopped by their farm and handed out Gatorade. And they'll remember that they weren't just Americans, they were American soldiers. At the end of the day, it's our job to make sure there are more kids who identify us as the soldiers who are generous, as opposed to the soldiers who destroy villages. One day at a time, one child at a time, that's how we make a difference. That's the only way we can come out of this mess feeling like it's worth something. Preserve the innocent, protect those who deserve it most. Sometimes I get out the fuzzy little rabbit foot. For a minute or two I sit smelling it, remembering the dirty farmland kids and the boy who taught me some Arabic. I taught him some English and we called it even.
Think, in your opinion, what do you think most Iraqis think about us and think about our presence in their country?
That's difficult to say. I was only there for a year, and I was only running engineer missions. I wasn't part of a civil affairs unit whose mission was to actually reach out to the people of Iraq. We did what we could in the allotted, mission or missions that we were doing. From what I saw, most of them are just people trying to live their lives, and I think they are very hopeful. I think they've lived under dictatorship and civil war for so long that they want something new. Democracy is a very radical thing. I don't know if it can work in a region where, again, dictatorships have flourished for centuries, but I think they, as a people, seem hopeful. I myself am hopeful. It's a tough situation, and again, I don't want to speak for everyone, but to me, it really seemed like kind of a lot of rotten apples, or a lot of good apples being ruined by the few rotten in the bunch, which is sad, you know, and human civilization historically has done that more than often. So, you know, I hope it can work for them.
Now, and I want to ask the same question again, but 20 years in the future, with the children that you gave the Gatorade to, what do you think these children will think of us 20 years from now? And again, just your opinion as being the person who met a few kids on the side of the road and gave them some Gatorade.
20 years from now, we'll probably still have a presence in Iraq, and not at the level we are at now, but you know, we'll have a base there, and Americans and Iraqis will they'll communicate, hopefully, and they'll be the average Iraqi will know the history of this war, and what we did and what we didn't do, and everything that kind of panned out. The kids that I had contact with, I hope they took positive away from it. Even when we first met them and they first came up to us, they seemed very, you know, they were submissive, but they weren't scared. You know, I don't think even when I got there in 2005 that the people were necessarily afraid of us, you know, which proves to me that the soldiers who came before me had kind of done the same thing we were doing, and reached out to these people and kind of built that trust. I guess all I can hope for is that trust continues, and that they trust us to do the right thing and to help them. And like I said, I hope it works out.
So will there be more books?
I hope so. I'm working full-time, more than full-time usually, and going to school part-time. So that a lot of my time is occupied there. And Heather and I bought a house last year, and we just bought a new puppy. So, you know, our time is limited. But I am trying to write. I've actually met a lot of people through this book and going out and talking about it at bookstores, at libraries, at schools. And there's a few contacts I have that I definitely want to pursue. You know, other writers and even a guy that writes plays and stuff or directs plays. I don't know if he's ever written one, but so hopefully I can kind of venture down some road somewhere and continue writing.
Will it be the same genre of books, or do you intend to go out elsewhere?
I'm not really sure as of yet. I tried some like regular old fiction stuff for a little while, but I really think, you know, this is what I know. This is who I am, and I think at least for now, I am going to focus on vets. You know, this is a war that's still going on. There's still people that need therapy and need to process, and if I can do other writing projects that can get that out and help other people, that'd be I think the best option.
Ryan, I wanted to say thank you for joining us today and for sharing your book and your thoughts and your feelings with us. We wish you the best of luck in the future, and I want to say thank you again for your service. So thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.
The book is The Ghost of War, the true story of a 19-year-old GI. The author is Ryan Smithson. Copies of this book are available at the William K. Sanford Town Library. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again on the next installment of the Colony Veterans Project.